At the crossroads of the Arabian, Syrian, and Negev deserts, fortress-like cliffs protect the remains of some of the most spectacular and mysterious monuments of the ancient world. Discovered by Western explorers in the 19th century, they at once stood as a gigantic riddle. Their architecture was almost 2,000 years old and rivaled some of the greatest constructions of Rome or Alexandria. Yet the civilization that had created them was completely unknown. Who had built these monuments, and how and why were they constructed in this remote place? 150 years later, Petra has become Jordan's biggest tourism destination. But the true nature of its monuments, as well as the history they bear testimony to, remains essentially a mystery. Over the last 20 years, a major international effort has been undertaken to reopen the investigation. Research areas have been widened out considerably, and new clues are being discovered at a steady pace. Like the scattered pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle, they are gradually coming together to form a new vision of Petra, and one that is even more amazing than all the legends it had previously inspired.
Petra's more than a city. It was the seat of a kingdom whose peace and prosperity was the envy of the ancient world.
The history of this unique city and its fascinating monuments is slowly emerging from the sand and rock. And just like the site itself, it looks like no other. Geologist Tom Paradise has spent 15 years working to protect the remains of Petra. To him, all the mysteries of this site are already encapsulated in the first monument encountered by the visitor. The Bedouins call it Hasne, the treasury. And when they caught their first glimpse of it, the first explorers to arrive here would have been thrown into utter confusion.
When the first 19th century explorers come in, what they saw was this grand architecture that represented sort of the perfect styling of the Greco-Roman Mediterranean during this period.
Initially, they thought they had found some still unknown Roman remains. Indeed, in the year 106, the Romans had annexed this part of the world to create the Roman province of Arabia. But closer examination quickly showed this first impression was wrong.
There are indeed Roman motifs, but then we begin to notice that there's a Roman, a Greek, a Roman motif. They're interspersed, but they're merged in a way that's almost seamless.
And the more one looks at this monument, the more intriguing its architecture becomes.
We notice a whole new level and a whole new type of element that's been used here. We see architectural motifs that are really quite strange. The split pediments, the rotunda, the bas-relief in the middle gives us this whole new sort of art form and architectural combination of motif, and we start to see a culture emerge that we really knew nothing about. And then you realize that all of this was carved in a sheer face, a sheer cliff of sandstone. This living rock was removed to expose this magnificent piece of architecture that is the Hasne.
This facade is not a construction, but a giant sculpture 40 meters high and 28 meters across, Who were the people who had created this extraordinary piece of architecture? And why carve and set such a spectacular facade in this out-of-the-way place? The interior of the monument provides no answers.
It's just a single large room with three smaller chambers on the side, and there's nothing else inside. But really what you see is just the beauty of the natural rock and its reds and colors. Spectacular.
Further ahead, the valley gradually starts to open out and the mystery deepens.
We see a very, very different scale that's being utilized in the architecture. This is a much more human scale. These are simple spaces. See a very, very plain facade, really with no sort of Greco-Roman motifs. But what we see that are very, very distinct are these crow steps. And the crow steps are markedly indicative of these Mesopotamian styles that we see during this period. So this is really strange.
In all the different valleys that make up the vast basin of Petra, more than 600 facades carved out of the rock offer a multitude of variations on this architectural riddle. What civilization could have produced this unique combination of East and West? It soon became clear that the vast majority of these carved facades of different styles and dimensions did not open on homes or palaces or temples. They were tombs. But also that over the centuries, they'd been repeatedly pillaged and sometimes reoccupied by Bedouin families, using them as homes or stables. The 2,000 years that had passed had left nothing but stones for the archaeologists to question. 150 years after its discovery, this huge necropolis continued to capture the attention of the researchers, still struggling to uncover its mysteries. Yet Petra had been mentioned in the works of two Greek writers. One described a plausible nomadic encampment, while the other wrote about a luxurious city peopled by gentlefolk with sophisticated habits. How could such a place have existed in this desert environment? To find out more, excavations have begun close to the only construction that was still visible in the center of the basin encircled by mountains. A Roman-like temple known by the Bedouins as the Casa el Bint al-Faroun, or the Castle of the Pharaoh's Daughter. Christopher Tuttle is the head of the American Center for Oriental Research in Amman. He was in the right position to see the radically new image of Petra emerge from this work.
Much of what we see today in the city center and on the pathway leading into the city center was actually not uncovered 20 years ago.
He's currently working on the conservation of one of the first structures uncovered by the excavations. A second temple that the researchers have named the Temple of the Winged Lions. Like the Hasna, its architecture is influenced by the Greco-Roman style. But then, on the banks of the Wadi Musa that cuts through the basin, a triumphal arch and colonnaded street have also been revealed. And on the other side of this street stands a huge construction, the largest building yet discovered in Petra. It's also in the Greco-Roman style, but its layout does not correspond to any known building. And the capitals on its columns were decorated with a motif that has never been seen before in any ancient civilization.
We have no other examples from, say, the Greek world, the Roman, or the Egyptian cultures that quite match this. This structure would have had a minimum of about 480 distinct elephant heads.
A full, sophisticated city centre was emerging from the sands, marked by this odd composite style.
Here in the city center, we have all of the types of structures one would expect from an ancient city, especially a capital city. We have administrative buildings. We have civic structures for entertainment like theaters. We have houses for everyday people and some wealthy villas. And then, of course, we also have the tombs embedded right into the fabric of the urban center.
The omnipresence of tombs around this city centre is also completely different to existing models. No known civilization has ever lived amidst its dead. Yet, anywhere the archaeologists have carried out surveys at the foot of these mountains, they've discovered vestiges that reveal just how big this ancient city was. Excavating this site is a massive undertaking, and one which is today still in its very early stages.
Of the area that we've investigated, it's substantially less than 2% that's actually been excavated. This space alone is about 6 square kilometers, but the ancient city was much bigger in its metropolitan footprint. It extends at least another 9 kilometers to the north and another 10 kilometers to the south in what is basically a rolling series of suburbs. One could easily say that the overall metropolitan area of the city was at least the size of the island of Manhattan. At its height, we expect this city probably housed somewhere between 20 or 30,000 people.
These spectacular discoveries gave credit to the only point on which the Greek writers agreed. In antiquity, Petra was the capital of a wealthy desert kingdom, and its inhabitants were called Nabataeans, a nomadic people. But nobody knew where these Nabataeans had come from, and when or why they had settled here. Michel Mouton is an archaeologist. For many years, he's studied the traces left by nomadic societies in Arabia. He was struck by a resemblance between the tombs that were considered to be the oldest of Petra and some of the 4th century BC funereal monuments he'd studied in southern Arabia. Unlike all the others, these 6 tombs are not facades, but cubes of sandstone that have been completely cut out of the rock face. Similar in shape to the Arabian funereal monuments, they have the same pale color and are decorated with the same characteristic crow steps. Could they attest to the origins of the Nabataeans? Yet a fundamental difference prohibited this conclusion. In Petra, these monoliths hold funereal chambers, while the Arabian monuments are solid blocks that go with underground pits where the bodies were entombed.
In this conception of death, the home of the body, which is in an underground tomb, is clearly separated from the funereal stele in which the soul of the deceased rests.
But one of Petra's tombs presents a further twist. Its exterior decoration is complete, but only the beginnings of an opening for a funeral chamber have been carved out.
We thought that maybe these funereal chambers inside the monolithic tombs were a form of recycling or reuse of older funerary monuments that were originally solid steles without an interior chamber that used to be associated with a separate tomb.
If he is right, then there should be old underground tombs close by the monoliths.
During our excavations around these monuments, we soon found the tombs they were originally associated with, confirming our theory that they were originally associated with separate tombs. Here, for example, behind this tomb number 303, an underground room was carved some 3 meters deep, which extends back under this big rock, measuring around 6.5 by 7.5 meters.
This established that the Nabataeans did indeed come from the center of Arabia, probably around the 4th century BC. The question still remains as to how this unusual city and necropolis were created here. And Michel Mouton spent 4 years co-authoring a project with the aim of providing an answer.
In archaeological terms, remains of the Nabataean culture can be found across a fairly large territory, which stretched to Haran in the north, and as far as to Madain Saleh or Hegra in the south, now in Saudi Arabia, into the Negev and across a large part of Jordan. All of these locations emerged as very important places for trade during the 3rd and 4th centuries BC.
In ancient times, the Arabian Peninsula was the gateway to the Orient for the Greco-Roman world. Spices from India were brought by sea to the kingdoms of southern Arabia. But to reach the Mediterranean ports, they had to be transported across the huge deserts covering most of the peninsula. Very high transportation costs meant they were luxury products in the West. The caravan trade that sprang up as a result became a highly lucrative activity for the Bedouin nomads, who alone knew the routes and watering holes necessary to make their way across.
The Nabataeans settling here and the creation of Petra is linked to the caravan trade and its roots. It was part of a more widespread movement across Arabia that saw those populations involved in this trade progressively settling down.
The Nabataeans also transported other products consumed in ever-growing quantities by Greco-Roman populations: incense and myrrh. These resins, used by many different religions, were sometimes worth even more than gold. They're extracted from wild shrubs that only grow on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. Their cultivation was one of the main sources of wealth for the kingdoms in this region of the world that the Romans referred to as Arabia Felix, or Happy Arabia. And the Nabataeans gradually imposed themselves as essential intermediaries in their transportation.
The Romans spent a lot of money on procuring this incense. Indeed, Pliny himself complained of the huge cost it represented. All the different populations involved in transporting this incense gradually became rich, and the Nabataeans were one of those that gradually put down roots, settling in the northernmost part of this trade route.
Petra then became a major crossroads for this trade. It was a key staging post between the East and the Roman Empire. All around the site, ongoing excavations are uncovering many remains linked to this activity. Small forts and resting points for caravans by each waterhole, where Nabataean coins have been found along with pottery used to transport luxury goods. These were essential stopping points for the caravans coming from the desert. They were also custom posts where taxes were levied on goods passing through. But there are also traces of a huge network of long-distance surveillance and communication through lookout posts and small forts on the tops of the hills rising out of the desert. They followed the routes linking Petra to the southern part of Arabia and were no doubt used to monitor the progress of the caravans and to ensure their safe passage. "500 kilometers south of Petra, in modern-day Saudi Arabia, an exceptional site marks one of the crossroads on this trade route. Over the last few years, it's become one of the keys to solving the great Nabataean puzzle. Hegra, today known as Nabataeans, is Petra's little sister. Next to the site is a miniature sikh, which seems to imitate that of Petra, leading inside a small sandstone massive that contains religious installations. For archaeologists, the importance of Hegra is invaluable. It provides a second source of information to shed light on Nabataean history and culture. Excavations only really began here in 2008, when Nabataeans became the first place in Saudi Arabia to be included on the UNESCO World Heritage List. They're being carried out by a French-Saudi team, led by François Villeneuve and Leila Neme.
Hegra is a much smaller site than Petra. And to give an idea of the scale, some 620 tombs with decorated facades have been found at Petra, whereas here there are 94.
Here, as in Petra, there are very few visible remains of the city built by the Nabataeans.
We're standing on the ramparts of the city of Hegra. These ramparts date back to the Nabataean era in the 1st century AD. At 150 meters over there, we can see a gray line that comes down towards us, snaking back and forth. That's all that remains of these ramparts of unfired bricks. It's pretty long, around 3 kilometers, and containing an area of 52 hectares. It was quite a big city.
Hegra was a substantial provincial town, and probably a military post that marked the edge of the Nabataean kingdom. A little further to the south, the plains narrow and probably provided a natural border with the kingdoms of southern Arabia. But this location had no doubt been known to the nomads for a very long time because it's an oasis. There is a water table below the plain that collects all the rainwater from the mountains bordering it to the west.
The Nabataeans took advantage of the presence of this water, building and digging more than 100 wells to provide water for all the inhabitants and irrigation to create farms all around.
A few kilometers from the site, some farms growing prized produce still profit today from this exceptional situation. Excavations in the town itself are limited, for the same reason as they are in Petra. The task is a mammoth one in terms of the resources available. However, the tombs have already begun to provide a great deal of information. In architectural terms, they provided a point of comparison that has helped our understanding of the unique style of Nabataean funereal monuments.
In Hegra, a provincial city, you don't find any of the more elaborate tombs. By that I mean tombs like those we refer to as the royal tombs in Petra, with facades that are up to 50 meters tall, with lots of Greek-style elements like on the Hasne, for example. You don't find the finest carvings on the facades of tombs in Hegra. So you can imagine a provincial town where the dignitaries wanted to have tombs carved to the same standard and importance as those in Petra, but there was an absence of technical sophistication that is clearly visible on the facades of the tombs.
But despite these differences, they obey the same principles as the great facades of Petra.
The Nabataean tombs are the result of a combination of styles, and there is an expression used to describe them that I think fits well. They call it Arabic Baroque. That means there is both a combination of different styles, but also a vertical layering of different architectures.
The Nabataeans were nomads, so they had no history of construction. Their first buildings were probably those monolithic funereal monuments, simply decorated with crow steps. But as their trading increased, they were exposed to more diverse sources of inspiration.
The Nabataeans were inspired by the styles of the people they were in contact with, from the East, from Egypt, Rome and Greece. And their strength, and what is interesting to us, is that they brought all these styles together in their own totally original one.
But how was a nomadic population able to take on techniques and styles that the great empires are taking centuries to develop? According to Tom Paradise, part of the answer lies in the ingenuity with which they use the only raw material available to them, sandstone.
The sandstone that we find here that the Nabataeans use in their work is common as a material across the Mediterranean and the Middle East, but it's not a common building material. It's rather friable, it weathers easily, and it's really sort of unpredictable once you work your way into the rock.
Both in Petra and in Hegra, the unpredictability of the rock sometimes forced the stonecutters to abandon a facade they were working on.
It really took a very deep understanding of the rock for them to use it in this unusual and magnificent way that they did. So they create both an architectural style that uses what they have, and then what they did is they manipulated well-known stone masonry and engineering techniques of the period to take it to a new level.
The Nabataeans took a unique approach. They carved their monuments rather than constructed them. Their creations merged into their environment whilst fully appropriating it. But how were they able to carve facades up to 40 meters high in the rock face itself? Wood is too scarce here to use for scaffolding, and none of the monuments in Petra or Hegra bear any traces of its use. On the cliff that looks down over the city centre of Petra, this unfinished facade, which would have gone on to be even bigger than that of the Hasna, offers a valuable clue.
This indicates to us the uniqueness of how the architecture was actually carved from the rock. Because we think of carving a surface as involving receding back, cutting back into the stone. But here in Petra, they cut deep as far back as they could and then took the whole surface down to the ground, exposing more or less the whole facade as they went. We don't know of any other culture or society using this kind of engineering technique for this sort of scale of construction.
Fascinated by this amazing feat, Tom Paradise embarked on an original project to recreate the carving of a Nabataean tomb in order to try out the various hypotheses regarding the techniques that were used. He's chosen a modest yet representative style of tomb. A Roman doorway, columns with Nabataean capitals, an Egyptian gorge, and crow steps, of course.
There are a few magnificent facades in Petra, like the monastery and the treasury, the fascinate. However, this sort of facade represents more than 500 other facades in Petra. So this style really is the archetype of the tomb facades.
Carving sandstone cliffs in Petra is unthinkable. So the experiment will be carried out in the US. The first challenge for stonecutters Blake Rankin and Nathan Hunt is to find some sandstone in California that offers the same characteristics as the sandstone carved by the Nabataeans in Petra.
Looks like a promising prospect.
Yeah.
We're looking for a fine-grained sandstone which lends itself to ornamental carving.
That looks like the type of stone we're looking for. Yeah, this is great. It looks like it's going to carve really well.
Tom Paradise selected the tools based on the marks visible on the Nabataean monuments.
The technology used with chisels and stonework haven't changed in 2,000 years. We use the same chisels, and so they leave the same marks.
Claw chisels, flat chisels, and pointed chisels are all still used today.
The pointed chisel is used for the coarser chiseling that removes large amounts of rock.
So the two stonecutters use pointed chisels to attack the rock. The sandstone is certainly more crumbly than the other materials typically used for building in antiquity. But it's still a rock, and it takes them several weeks to chip away to reveal the first platform that will allow them to work on the surface to be carved without the use of scaffolding. But in creating this platform, they also realized that the shape of the rock is not exactly lending itself to Tom Paradise's initial aim.
You never really know how it's going to work in the stone until you get started.
We think it's going to look a lot better if we widen the facade.
Make each block of the crow step 7 by 7 inch.
Widening out the facade slightly changes the design of the crow steps. Indeed, in Petra and Hegra, they all seem to be slightly different to each other, which had for a long time intrigued archaeologists.
Increasingly, we notice that changes of the rock actually cause changes within the design elements. I think we have to give more credit to the rock than we have in the past.
Sort of roughly mark 9 inches on there. Just start cutting this while you're doing that because the wind's blowing this way, right?
Then they encounter a problem often faced by the Nabataeans.
Tell you what I might do
Standing on
is,
this narrow ledge to
start
work the
cutting this while
vertical
you're doing it, 'cause the
surface
wind's blowing
is
this
very
way.
dangerous.
I die like a Nabataean is my worst fear. Falling off the rock.
How many stonecutters lost their lives creating monuments like the Hasne? 1/3 of the way through, there's a surprise.
I mean, I really cannot believe that much carving produced this much rubble.
The volume of discarded rubble seems much greater than the space it took up when it was still part of the rock face. The unfinished tombs in Hegra revealed that the Nabataeans had found a way to take advantage of this phenomenon. In a place like the desert, where natural resources are limited, nothing is wasted and everything must be used.
There is nothing like an unfinished tomb to understand how the Nabataeans carved their facades. At the top, you can see what look like channels or slots, which show that they removed blocks for building in the city, for example.
A study carried out here revealed how much stone was removed in this way for other constructions.
The biggest tomb in Hegra, that would have been made for a general who must have been a slight megalomaniac, would have required, had it been finished, the removal of around 5,000 cubic meters of stone. That's enormous.
5,000 cubic meters is around a quarter of the volume of stone used by the Romans to build the Pont du Gard in the south of France. 3 months after work began, the team finally starts on the finishing. And here they discover another use for the discarded stone.
Now, using the same stone that we carved off the rock, I'm just rubbing the last little stages, just kind of carefully finishing off that last surface.
Wow, guys, it looks great. We've got Assyrian, Egyptian, Greco-Roman, but you put it together, you stand back, and it's Nabataean.
And now it's a little bit Californian.
That's right.
This experiment shows how, in choosing to carve their facades rather than building them, the Nabataeans were certainly not taking the easy route. It also underlines the originality and economy of the methods they developed. Carving a small tomb would have taken months. A large one would have then taken years. And they carved hundreds of them. And they would have used the blocks created by this work to build their cities. What place did these sepulchres then have in Nabataean society for them to have dedicated so much energy and means to building them? So much so that the entire architecture of this civilization seems to have been developed from them. The excavations of the tombs in Hegra have provided some answers. Nathalie de l'Hôpital is an expert in funereal archaeology. But here, as in Petra, the 2,000 years that have since gone by have left very few clues for archaeologists.
They were completely ransacked, over and over again. I rarely make findings that are connected here. It was actually pretty violent because things were torn apart. In the last tomb I excavated, I realized that they had pulled the fingers off to take their rings.
However, thanks to the particularly dry conditions here, there is often more information to glean from what remains of these pillages than there is in Petra.
Here we mainly find the bones of individuals who were interred in the tombs. Leather that would have been used for shrouds, wood for the caskets, and textiles.
The quantity of bones shows that these sepulchres held many more bodies than the number of graves dug inside might have suggested.
For example, there are 2 graves here, so there was probably a person buried in each grave, and then they would have added others on the ground in caskets and shrouds. These burials would have happened over 3 centuries.
Initial analysis of the materials found has clarified things even further.
These are the bones I found in tomb number 97. Here are mainly skulls, jaws, and some of the arms I found. At the end of the table are the children. I sorted them by size, so we can see this tomb contained children of all ages. Then we tried to get an idea of how many individuals were buried in this tomb. From the number of humerus bones, there were around 20 adults.
Another tomb from Hegra revealed the remains of more than 80 people.
I also try to find what we call discrete traits. They are traits that determine whether the buried people were part of the same family.
These unique morphological traits are linked to our genetic heritage and help establish whether the people bearing them were related to one another.
Here is an example with a humerus. On it you can see perforations that this one doesn't have, but which you can see on this one. So from that I can tell that these people belong to the same family.
The Nabataean facade tombs are communal sepulchres that were used for the remains of children and adults from the same family. And they were used for many generations. But one of the biggest discoveries from Hegra also shed light on the people who had these tombs carved.
Unlike in Petra, where all the tombs are anonymous and we don't know to whom they belonged, this tomb and around 30 others in Hegra bear an inscription using Nabataean characters. This inscription tells us that it belonged to a woman and her daughter. The woman's name was Cam, and they had it built for themselves and their descendants. And the text says that anyone authorized by the hand of Cam could also be buried in one of the spaces inside the chamber. The inscriptions mention certain professions of the owners of the tombs. They were mainly high-ranking military people, which shows that the people who had these tombs carved were dignitaries. It is clear that the biggest tombs were very expensive and only accessible to a small part of the population. There are around 15 of them on the site, so in a town of 60 hectares where you would expect several thousand inhabitants, that represents a tiny proportion of the population who were able to buy themselves a tomb with a facade 15 or 20 meters high.
The tombs of the less well-off were found elsewhere. Simple graves dug into the rock, cut into the sandstone on ground level. They were invisible. The Nabataeans' funereal monuments reflected, and in a way established, the social status of the families that had them erected. And for Leila Neme, this explains the choice of their location.
There is a system with the town in a central plain and the tombs spread around it. And almost all the tombs in Hegra are facing inwards towards the town. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a very rich Nabataean who made his fortune trading spices with southern Arabia. What would he want? He'd want to make his tomb and glorify his family by ensuring the tomb would be visible from as far as possible.
The visibility of the monument from the town was so important that in Hegra, it even gave rise to a very peculiar practice.
The locations were taken possession of. Nabataean texts state that so-and-so, son of so-and-so, took possession of a particular place. That means that there was probably some kind of municipal management of the locations fit for tombs. And the higher the cliff, and the bigger the tomb that could be cut there, the more expensive it was.
In Petra, the capital, the gigantic monuments that can be seen from the city centre were certainly the tombs for the royal families. But the hundreds of little tombs scattered across the site face in different directions. For Michel Mouton, this can be explained by the gradual development of the city.
Cities that are created when a mainly nomadic people settles are initially very scattered in their formation,
au début des villes très clairsemées, très éparses. Et progressivement,
Then gradually these spaces are urbanized by different family groups or tribes.
familiaux, par tribus.
Scattered in the different valleys, these families or tribes would have gradually carved out in sight of their homes the family tombs for the important people in their community. But the city gradually expanded, and the tortuous layout of the land had led to this unique interweaving between the city of the living and that of the dead. But how could this city have developed in such proportions in this harsh environment? This natural fortress was an ideal hiding place for a temporary encampment. But it offers none of the advantages that encourage a city to grow. Water sources are rare and far away from the site. And the Wadi Musa River that flows through the basin is dry for most of the year. Sometimes it rains in winter and spring, but these are violent rainstorms. The water runs down the cliff faces, making for sudden high water in the wadis. Turned into destructive torrents, they plough through the landscape, carrying away any cultivatable soil in their path. How could they have fed a city of 30,000 inhabitants in these conditions? Clive Vella, Emmanuel Bocanchea and Thomas Urban from Brown University have been studying a wadi located several kilometers north of Petra. They've discovered traces of large-scale projects that suggest the region's inhabitants had come up with a way of using these seasonal rains to their advantage.
So what you see here is one particular dam, and you can see one segment of it here and another segment there, and obviously it's no longer functioning, so it's been completely washed out by the wadi. But it's one of a whole series of dams and terraces that function together with various rock-cut channels across this entire landscape. And all of these pieces worked together in a kind of a complex system to create agriculturally viable soil.
The remains of a second dam clearly show the role it played in this system.
Well, as you can see here, more than a meter of sediment has accumulated as a result of this dam being in the landscape. That's sediment that would have washed away down the wadi system, and this has been accumulated for agriculture over the time that the dam's been here.
But how do we know if these installations existed in Nabataean times? The team used a very modern technique that allows the dating of sediments or earth thanks to the special properties of certain crystals that it contains.
All right, do you have the tube? Thank you, Clive.
When placed in the dark, these crystals gradually become charged with additional electrons. When exposed to the light again, they immediately release them. The quantity of freed electrons then enables one to calculate the time that has passed since they were last exposed to sunlight.
Thank you. Okay, got the bag ready?
But these precious samples need to be gathered in complete darkness and sent to the laboratory in totally sealed containers. The results showed that these sediments were last exposed to sunlight some 2,000 years ago, around the year 0. So it was indeed the Nabataeans who constructed this whole system all along the wadi.
These black features that you see on the screen, those are various dams and other features in the landscape that have been mapped in by the project. The system in Wadi Baka essentially operates as a large filter, a multi-stage filter. Large stones, gravel, this type of thing are all retained uphill, and the sediment passes through multiple stages, leaving these things behind. And by the time you get down into this area where it can spread out broadly, you have a much higher quality soil for agriculture.
We now understand that the Nabataeans had managed to create a gigantic artificial oasis here.
the construction of these was so clever and so effective that the Bedouin populations today still use the soil that was accumulated for agriculture. This is, in fact, a more sustainable small-scale agriculture than modern desert irrigation.
This farmland stretched for kilometers around Petra and provided food for the city. Another team from Brown University is studying one of the gorges that cuts through the mountain range to the north and provides one of the natural access routes into the center of Petra. It requires the trained eye of an archaeologist or a desert nomad in order to detect the work of the Nabataeans in this chaotic landscape.
This is one of the things that the people who were living in this landscape became very good at, was this sort of blending between the human-modified and the natural.
In order to truly benefit from this mineral environment, the Nabataeans drew on all their expertise in the field of stone cutting.
So this is a great example of one of these archaeological features that is not immediately obvious when you're walking through and looking at things. And what we're looking at here is a triple beetle, and you can see the three parts of it right in front of me.
Betyls are representations of Nabataean gods and comprise one or more rectangles of carved stone inside a niche. Various kinds are commonly found in Nabataean sites, and for archaeologists, they constitute precious landmarks.
The presence of a beetle is oftentimes a clue that there are other things going on in the area. So we often see them in association with roadways like we have here, but also in association with water features like the cistern just adjacent to us.
You wouldn't necessarily, looking at this crevice, assume that it has any real purpose or it's been modified in any way. So we've got actually the top of this chasm, and it's coming all the way down like that. And we can see it on the drawing. It's actually coming all the way down here into a settling pool where the water loses its silt, and then it's drained into the cistern, which is here, which is right ahead there.
The marks left from the rock carving conclusively prove this was a Nabataean creation. And so does the ingenious economy of the process.
This is an example of a system in which absolutely every resource is being used. It's a no-waste system. We have the water running down from the hillside. The silt is being filtered out in these settling basins. The water is then captured in the cistern, and then it's used for drinking. And then the silt is then used as fertilizer for the agricultural fields to really increase the agricultural productivity of the landscape.
In this environment, water is without doubt the most precious resource. And the further one heads into this valley towards the city centre, the more systems one finds.
We're looking at two dams below us. Obviously, they're modern constructions, but they're partially built out of ancient blocks, so we suspect that something like this would have been here in the past as well.
And I think this is knowledge that's passed down. These water areas are actually used today, much as they were used in the past. And so there really is this local memory of place, I think, that is essential for something like Petra to be possible.
All around, the rock has been carved to create channels, tanks, and basins. Combining their stone carving talents with their understanding of the desert environment, the Nabataeans had developed unique expertise in terms of hydraulic systems.
Well, there's this big reveal, so I mean, it's not just something that happens at the Seek.
The walls of the Seek, the main entrance to the city, are carved with channeling on either side. The channel on the left is open and collects the water running down the cliff face. It includes a series of pools that allowed visitors arriving from the desert the opportunity to freshen up and water their animals. But on the right-hand side, one can see the remains of masonry work that suggests it held an enclosed system of terracotta pipes. Studies have shown that this system carried water to the city centre from the most important spring in the entire mountain system, Ain Musa, the spring of Moses, according to legend.
God tell Musa, up the stick under this rock, and the waters come. And Nabataean engineer coming here and take this water from here until Petra by channel. And this is the story.
The story is a simple one, but Ain Musa is almost 7 kilometers from the center of Petra. And marks suggest that each terracotta cylinder was around 30 centimeters long. The circuit would have needed tens of thousands of these lengths. Charles Ortloff is a hydraulic engineer who has spent years studying the systems at Petra. To him, the main problem posed by this 7-kilometer-long system is the slope. If it wasn't steep enough, the flow would be insufficient and irregular. Too steep, and it would create a phenomenon known as a hydraulic jump, causing pressure to build up in the system which sooner or later would break. To ensure optimum flow and avoid a hydraulic jump, the slope would have to be a constant 4 degrees. And in Petra, that's exactly the angle of the Nabataean pipe system.
They invented scientific principles that were only officially discovered in the West some 2,000 years later.
In the Hegra Mountains at the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula in modern-day Oman, there are ancient channels and pools that are very similar to those of the Nabataeans. They're still maintained today by Bedouins that have settled in this valley, which, without these systems, would be totally arid. They demonstrate how even modest systems such as these were enough to radically transform a desert environment. However, in Petra, it seems that the Nabataeans pushed these techniques to a surprising level of sophistication. Sue Alcock recently took over the excavations at the Great Temple, and as soon as she arrived, she was struck by how many of these channels and systems were cut into the rock at the site.
Everywhere you look, both in the city and in the surrounding countryside, water just dominates the landscape. The Nabataeans didn't waste a drop of water. They caught it any way they could. They stored it any way they could.
But under the esplanade of the Great Temple, slabs smashed by fallen columns have revealed the traces of a plumbing system on a whole other level, involving underground pipes that would have been integrated into the building's architecture when it was constructed.
Yeah, there's a hole here.
To get a better look, Sue Alcock is using a ground-penetrating radar.
This is a way to get a faster look at what's down there, in the same way you would go in for an X-ray, perhaps, before you went in for a surgery.
The radar sends high-frequency radio waves into the ground. When these pass through materials of different density, such as stone and then earth, part of the wave is redirected back. The speed of this wave changes according to the material encountered. Earth makes it slower, and air sends it back faster. By measuring these variations, the radar can detect the presence of channels.
We've come across a disturbance now several times that is in line with this floor collapse back here, which is clearly connected to a channel, which you can see. And then you have a drain here. So we're likely passing over some conduit that connects the two.
The radar has confirmed that there was a network of pipes underneath the esplanade of the Great Temple. But it also showed that it probably continues under the entire city center.
If we could, you know, like make all this surface architecture go away, you know, just kind of like magically lift it up and look down, I think we'd see quite a network of these channels and canals and cisterns and capture points.
When Petra became a big urban center, the Nabataeans installed a water management system to match. Charles Ortloff has modeled all the systems discovered so far in a radius of 15 kilometers from the center. The results are impressive.
These are the main supplies of water from all of the cisterns, all the dams.
There were 8 springs, around 40 dams and barriers, more than 200 cisterns and reservoirs, and around 200 kilometers of piping, linking most of these installations into a massive integrated system. This model and the experiments he's carried out have allowed him to estimate the amount of water available back then, when the city counted around 30,000 inhabitants.
You sum up all of the water from various sources, that would lead to 8 liters per person per day.
8 liters in ancient times for a population that was used to surviving in a desert environment is much more than strictly necessary. But we're now only discovering how strictly necessary wasn't a real concern of the Nabataeans when they created this system. For the past 3 seasons, Liane Badal has been excavating the large area alongside the Great Temple. The first archaeologists called it the marketplace, because that was the usual function of unconstructed areas in the heart of ancient cities. But her discoveries turned all preconceived ideas about Petra upside down. The dig revealed traces of some large constructions. In particular, a wall covered by a waterproofing coating that extended down more than 2.5 meters. Surveys have revealed the corners of this structure. A huge open-air pool, 43 meters by 20.
So we have this very deep pool, and so one of the questions is, what is it used for? What was it used for? And we do know that in this time period, swimming pools had come into fashion, especially associated with palaces. Herod had swimming pools in his palaces just over the border.
But Herod's palace was next to the sea. And the pool in Petra had another surprise in store. The remains of a construction.
This is an island. We call it the island pavilion. You can see inside here, it's only been excavated half of it, but large open doorways, 4.5 meters wide, so that if you're sitting in the middle of this island, imagine dining, feasting, drinking wine.
And between this pool and the colonnaded street, the space was taken up with ornamental gardens.
This is something that is for luxury purposes. It's for recreational and for showing off. It's really conspicuous consumption of this precious resource, which is water, in this desert environment. Any dignitaries coming to visit Petra would have seen this garden in the middle of this desert city and been awed by it, I'm sure. The dating that we have for the construction of the monumental garden is the very end of the 1st century BC. It seems to have been built by Aretas IV, one of the great, best-known kings in the Nabataean kingdom.
Aretas IV is the Nabataean king researchers have come to know best. His reign, from 9 BC to 40 AD, seems to have been the longest in Nabataean history. We now believe he was responsible for building the Hasne at the end of the Sikh, probably his own family's funereal monument. But it was only recently discovered that the creation of this masterpiece of Nabataean sculpture was preceded by an even more impressive construction by Nabataean hydraulics engineers. Because this exceptional location right at the entrance to the city is also one of the most vulnerable. Every year, it's subjected to the destructive power of the rains, which in 1963 saw a group of French tourists lose their lives in the gorges. After working for more than 20 years on restoring the Sikh and creating dams to protect it from these high waters, Weli Belvald has now been tasked by the Jordanian authorities to look into the protection of the Hasne and its esplanade, which is still today buried under 3 meters of silt. And just like in the Sikh, in every place where it seemed necessary to construct a barrage to hold back the seasonal torrents, he discovered that the Nabataeans had got there first.
There are always several hints pointing towards a dam. So they made enormous grooves into both cliffs to anchor properly the dam to withstand the pressure of the water. Then we have inside the retention basins, we have like a whitewash indicating where the water touched the cliffs, and a certain lime deposit built up over the centuries.
And each time he found inscriptions and betils that left no doubt as to the origins of these remains.
You have to the right an inscription panel with a Nabataean dedicatory inscription, and to the left a small niche, not very deep, with one small betil in it. And that's definitely to ask the support of some deity to protect this dam for being destroyed by earthquakes.
He discovered that 2,000 years ago, the Nabataeans constructed a huge system of 5 dams, the sole function of which was to protect the location of the Hasne.
We have the treasury here, and we are now exactly here, the location of dam number 1. And you see that this is really by far the biggest retention basin in the entire system. Then we have again a long section of the narrow gorge, and then we have dam number 2. We are here at the location of dam number 2, which the Nabataeans started to build when they were realizing that dam number 3 and 4, built lower down, were overburdened by the water masses.
The Nabataeans also dug a large canal to divert most of the water to the widest branch of the Wadi, where a second retention basin was created. This canal, cut out of the rock, is around 50 meters long and over 4 meters deep. And the marks left a little lower down by the force of the water leave no doubt as to the importance of this arrangement.
You see very well when it bumped against the rock, all the grooves, the water eroded into the bedrock, and the big cave it took out from the original wall. And you see there are a lot of big sandstone boulders. These are remains from the upper dams, which were brought down during flash floods in winter time by water.
All of these constructions were amazing technical feats for that time, and a mammoth challenge.
Nobody knew how to build such a system in the entire Hellenistic culture of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Excavations on this last dam turned up a large quantity of shards of Nabataean pottery, dating its construction to between 50 to 25 years BC, around the same time as the swimming pool and gardens. And for Weli, the hydraulic systems in Petra are so fundamentally integrated that they could have only been designed and created in one go.
This dam system was not an isolated element, it was a part of a much more comprehensive system.
Indeed, the most recent discoveries show that huge projects were also undertaken in the center of Petra during the same period. Deep surveys under the terrace of the Casa El Bint have allowed Michel Mouton to carry out dating studies and, for the first time, to establish how the city centre evolved. Just as he had imagined, the nomad camps established on the banks of the Wadi Musa in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC were, over the subsequent 2 centuries, gradually replaced by neighbourhoods and houses. Then suddenly, towards the middle of the 1st century BC, all these houses were destroyed to make space for the construction of the monumental city centre we're now gradually discovering. The Great Temple, the Temple of the Winged Lions, the colonnaded street, the pool and gardens complex were all constructed at the same time.
This whole complex clearly follows a different axis than the previous architectural level. There is obviously an urban planning involved here that is totally different to what went before. So there was a desire to build this centre, a public centre at the heart of the city, and a public city centre that really had a very Western style with clear Hellenistic and Roman influences.
At the beginning of the Christian era, Petra completely transformed itself. So what happened? For Andrew Smith, who has excavated Nabataean caravan settlements, this period was marked by a spectacular boom in the spice trade.
There was an economic boom in the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. When Augustus came to power and the Mediterranean was pacified, the demand for frankincense and myrrh and other goods, peppers even, other exotic goods from the east, increased exponentially. And the Nabataeans, they were essentially in the right place at the right time.
They benefited so well from this boom that in the 1st century AD, one Roman author described them as one of the richest people in the world. And the collection of coins discovered in Hegra bears witness to the Nabataeans' sudden newfound wealth.
The most ancient coins are the small ones with owls. These coins are vague copies of Athenian ones. And then we see the first Nabataean coins appear, and those bear the face of Aratus IV. This is a bronze coin from Aratus IV. With his wife Shokilat, the king and queen appeared side by side. These small coins are everywhere. The Nabataeans produced them in industrial quantities. They are found all over the place, and across the whole of Jordan in particular.
This opulence seems to have triggered a real architectural explosion, and the whole city of Hegra emerged from that. The city developed in the 1st century BC under the rule of Aratus IV, and all the tombs that have been dated there were constructed between 1 and 75 AD. In Petra, the capital, the phenomenon began 50 years earlier, and in less than a century it gave rise to the lavish city centre complex and all the great funereal monuments with their facades that mark the birth and peak of this unique architectural style. What was the reason for this sudden frenetic construction? Michel Mouton and Liane Badal have come to the same conclusion.
You have to see Petra as a place where a group of people settled and placed themselves at the heart of Arabian trade during that period. Just as today you could say that Dubai is at the heart of modern Arabian commerce. In the same way, the Nabataeans wanted to show that they were completely integrated into the Western world with which they trade, from which they made their money, and with whose people they clearly had relationships. And they wanted to construct this westernized showcase in the heart of their city, a showcase that owes more to the Mediterranean culture than to the Arabic one from which they came.
The Nabataeans were matching the displays of Rome and Greece and Judea and Egypt, all these kingdoms around them, and showing themselves as equals, and that they are, it's really political propaganda. The monuments and the garden itself are part of this royal propaganda to show that they are powerful and wealthy and also master engineers.
But flaunting the Nabataean civilization in front of the rest of the world may have been the step too far that would lead to its eventual downfall. In 106 AD, fewer than 50 years after these huge projects were completed, the tiny Nabataean kingdom is annexed without a fight by the huge Roman Empire. And the Nabataeans will merge into this Roman world that they had already welcomed with open arms.
We really do believe that it was more like a very soft sort of corporate takeover or a client state where the Nabataeans were willing to work with the Romans to be a part of a larger empire for commerce and transportation and resources, and the Romans were thrilled to take on the nature of the client, the Nabataeans, to also increase their resource, modify the trade routes, and gain greater access to parts of the East.
But within this exchange, the unique culture that gave rise to the marvels of Petra will dissolve into the global Roman melting pot and eventually disappear. The amphitheatre sculpted from the rock by the Nabataeans will be enlarged by the Romans, destroying ancient tombs in the process. The Nabataean civilization vanishes. Petra loses its status as a great centre for trade, and its population dwindles. It will be Roman, then Byzantine, and then, with the rise of Islam, disappear in the eyes of the West. Over the centuries, earthquakes and erosion will gradually destroy the grand Nabataean constructions. But the rocks will preserve a memory of the spectacular yet ephemeral radiance of this unique culture. Like fascinating illustrations of a story with unknown morals, these incredible tombs, carved into the desert sandstone, will live on through the ages as so many riddles for future generations to solve.